Hi everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. So let me ask you this. Do you think a narcissistic personality can change? Let's take that on in this video. And this is part of a series we're doing on debunking myths about narcissism. So let's take this myth on. Can narcissism change? Can a narcissistic personality shift and change? Because that's the myth. A lot of people out there say, oh, of course it can change. All personalities can change. This myth is an oldie, right? It's a classic. It's the reason that most people get stuck in these messes in the first place. The myth is that narcissism can change. The myth is that narcissism can completely turn around and we can set people free from it. Maybe if we love the person enough or address their core wounds or figure out how to best talk to them, or maybe things will start working out for them and then their personality will shift. They're just grumpy because life's not going the way they want. Let's start with the idea. Let's talk about what change really is, right? Because there's change and then there's change. I don't know, if I move my car 2 feet forward in the driveway, I suppose I've moved it, but it doesn't really change anything, does it? Another car won't fit behind it, and most people wouldn't notice that it moved 2 feet. But literally speaking, it moved 2 feet. That's a change, right? And that right there is one of the issues that causes a lot of debate. What does change really mean? And how much change is enough to be meaningful? This is where the researchers and the therapists and the people experiencing narcissistic abuse will never be on the same page. When we do research on change, things that may show up as sort of being, I guess they change statistically in a meaningful way, they have little meaning in real life. For example, a person's score, I don't know, on some kind of emotional regulation test or test on insight or test on narcissism, I suppose maybe that could shift a little. But the people around them aren't noticing any meaningful change. They're still gaslighting, they're still manipulative, they're just still out there causing problems. There's still rage, all of those things. Maybe there's fewer episodes. The narcissistic person may catch it earlier. They may even apologize. But it still happens. Is that change? That's a subjective question. Therapists in general do not like the idea of talking about people not changing. I don't know, maybe it's a bad business model, right? It's like saying, hey, I'm a mechanic, and there are some cars out there I can't fix. You don't want to say that. It feels kind of bleak and hopeless. Many therapists take umbrage at this idea that narcissism is a pretty unchangeable kind of a personality style. And they still work with people saying, oh, maybe we could figure out a way to get you there. And then there are those who are experiencing narcissistic abuse who desperately want change to be possible so they can maintain the relationship. But they've tried for years. They've tried everything. They've gotten nowhere. And what happens with most survivors of narcissistic abuse is that they believe there's something wrong with them themselves, because everyone can change, right? And if they're not changing, they think I'm not worth changing for, but maybe they change for someone else. I have a unique perch on this because I've worked with a lot of narcissistic clients in therapy. And listen, I'm the first one to know, maybe I am a shit therapist and that's why people aren't changing, but let's just say I'm a decent therapist, right? So if I even gave myself a little benefit of the doubt, I have to say in working with narcissistic clients, we don't make much progress. And I see why that is. It comes down to people who are narcissistic having zero tolerance for stress or frustration or disappointment or criticism. I will see that just from 1 week to the next, a narcissistic person can go from well-regulated to rageful and vindictive. And when I point out the difference to them in 1 week, what happened? You changed so much. They'll start to rage at me. And if they're raging at me, I can't imagine the rage they must be manifesting to those close to them. And usually the only reason their rage was worse the second week was because a stressor came along. There are people out there who claim to have the solution to it all. I don't see it. I don't even think an intensive inpatient therapy would do it, because then the narcissistic person would still ultimately have to leave that intensive inpatient setting and be out in the world with all of its stresses and shame and disappointment. There are no magic spells, no magical trauma therapies, no magic mushrooms or other potions or lotions that make narcissism go away. Pushing back from an antagonistic personality style such as narcissism, for a person to do that means making a lifelong commitment to being mindfully aware of other people and coming from a place of empathy or compassion, because that's the rub. People who are narcissistic actually know what societally preferred behavior looks like. And sometimes in their contempt, they will label things like respect and compassion as weak or foolish or lame, or whatever words they can use to diminish empathy and compassion and respect. But the dysregulation, the impulsivity, and the oppositionality of narcissism, coupled with the lack of self-reflective capacity, means that when things are going beautifully or the way a narcissistic person wants, then they're actually able to play at the empathy and kindness game. They're able to look regulated and even play the I'm interested in you game. But when a narcissistic person is experiencing any sense of threat or things in life aren't going the way they want, they can become very reactive, and they're not able to inhibit their often cruel responses. It's for this reason that when people suspect that they are narcissistic themselves and ask me what they can do to change, I tell them, it's really all mindfulness all the time. That they always need to think about every word they say and how it could affect someone else, no matter how upset the narcissistic person is feeling. Let's face it, that's a tall order for any of us. But it's all but impossible for somebody who's narcissistic, who will often think, well, that's ridiculous. I can't do that. I have read many, many case reports over the year. These are published articles about one or two people, for example, who might have narcissistic personality disorder. And the article will go on to talk about how they were treated and the changes that these people were able to make. In most of these cases, these were people who had access to highly trained therapists. They had once or twice weekly sessions for at least 18 months or longer. This ain't happening, not in America. And since narcissistic people are about 60% more likely to drop out of therapy, even with all of that therapy in place, the first time the therapist goes hard and attempts to make them keep it real, they aren't likely to come back in. So there goes that chance to change. And anybody who can have that much therapy anyhow has a lot of money. Has it happened? Have people improved? I'm sure. I'm sure these cases have been there. And significant change like this is a unicorn. It's definitely not something someone can plan around. And the fact is, the published articles are about the successes. I recognize that narcissism has lots of what we call etiologies or origins: early life trauma, abuse, loss, attachment issues, emotionally unavailable parents, intergenerational patterns, spoiled kids, kids who are valued too much for their abilities or their appearance than for their inner worlds, attachment issues, you name it. And while some people with those difficult backstories may develop narcissistic personalities, most will not. The lack of self-reflective capacity and the tendency to blame other people means that people who are narcissistic will never recognize their contribution to an interpersonal situation or any situation in life, and will quickly blame others so they can avoid the shame. Personality is tough. It's a bit of a psychological fingerprint. And while there can be a little movement in some personality styles, some styles, antagonistic personality styles like narcissism, are very rigid and they are not amenable to change. Life is not Beauty and the Beast, where love saves a raging beast and turns him into a sweetheart. It's not all those feel-good movies in which love and inspiration turn someone hard-hearted into a big sweetheart. It just doesn't work that way. I wish it did. I really did. We would save so many broken hearts, so many broken families, and so many broken dreams. And frankly, save the narcissists from their broken spirits too. But alas, this is not a pattern that's easily amenable to change. I really do applaud people out there with narcissistic personality styles who say, I want to do the work. I say to you, by all means, do the work. It's an uphill slog, but it's worth doing. For those of you in relationships with narcissistic people, doing the work is their responsibility. You can't help them with this. No more than you could do a kid's homework and think they're going to learn. These are their miles to walk. And listen, I'd love to be out of a job. I'd love it if people could do the work and push back on this. But by and large, the people who do make the commitment are very rare, and most of you experiencing narcissistic abuse are not likely to experience significant change in the narcissistic people who populate your life. I hope that debunks that myth a little bit more clearly. Thanks again.